first time I saw Sasquatch was in December of 2018. It was late bow season in my great state of Michigan. My mother's horse had just passed away, and we were devastated at the loss of our show boy. So I did what I do best from October until January. I went hunting. I took my crossbow and headed down the road to a nearby property that I should have never gone to. I had managed to slip in and out of there on many occasions. I was working my way up a deer trail through dead-fall poplar trees with the wind in my face. The plan was to stalk the upper meadow and wait until dark and attempt to ambush any large buck or fawnless doe that stepped out. As I approached the meadow, my thoughts and vision began to swirl, and I thought I was going to pass out. I stepped to the edge of the meadow, stood 5 feet from an old maple that was almost 6 feet across, and I looked to my left, and I was horrified. 30 yards away from me, I saw 2 large Sasquatches walking away. I distinctly remember the muscle mass of the male's back and shoulders, and the large girth of the female. She was the 10-foot-tall blonde version of the Patterson-Gimlin film. The male was taller than her by 2 feet, and his hair was black and buckskin brown. He was half as wide as that old maple tree. The pines he walked through just came above his knees. Now I'm 5'6", and those same trees came up to my chest. Had he been right next to me, he would have dwarfed me, and it scares me as I think about it. I don't like to go in the woods in the darkness, and this experience almost ruined hunting for me. I've had many more encounters since and have learned plenty. I've lost my fear of forest neighbors now and have grown fond of them. I feel safe with them as I have seen them protect me. But it's not all good news. I'm actively dealing with one in my new territory that has proven to be aggressive. If you're interested in any of the other encounters, all you have to do is ask. And the gentleman signs off Coyote Wild Bay, which is the name of his YouTube channel. If I think about it, I'll try to find it and link it in the description below, but if I forget about it, which I'm likely to do, just look up Coyote Wild Bay in your search bar and his channel should come right up. You can probably hear a lot more of his other stories. I really appreciate this encounter story. Thank you for sending it, Coyote Wild Bay. You the man. Appreciate you. All right, here's a story about a dogman or Rugaroo or a werewolf. The category is Rugaroo, according to my editor. But let's read this story. This looks really good. Looks kind of spooky. In the mid-1980s, I was visiting my great-aunt Kat. I had just broken up with my first boyfriend, and I was pouting on the back porch looking out into the bayou. My Aunt Kat could walk like a ghost if she wanted. We all called her Kat because she was as silent and graceful as one. She asked what I was upset about, but I didn't want to answer her, so I asked her a question instead. Do you believe in the Rugaroo? I asked. For your listeners who don't know, the Rugaroo is our version of Bigfoot of the bayou. Aunt Kat sat down beside me and smiled, looking out as well. Well, I believe in many things, she said in her strong but frail voice. I believe in the magic of the bayou and there's good and evil in the world. Well, do you think the Rugaroo is evil? I asked. No, she said. They're trying to survive just like the rest of us, hiding from humans. Well, you make it sound like humans are the evil ones, I told her. She gave me a strange look as if she were searching for something. Then she nodded and continued. Now, you're old enough to understand that not everything is so simple or fair, she said, looking out again. I could tell she wasn't looking into the bayou sparkling in the sunlight or the dragonflies that fly about, but in her own past. I knew not to disrupt her. The story she went on to tell me is something I will never forget. She was born to a wealthy and influential family, but life was never easy for her. She never had the true luxury of wealth since she was born a girl. She had a room and she had food and clothing and an education, but that was it. At that time, girls were only good for being sold off into marriage to increase their empires for future sons. For some reason, her elder brother always hated her and made her his target. When he would practice hunting, he would do it with her as the prey. And as he grew older, his hunts grew as well. Once, when my aunt was only 10 years old, she had to put a lock on the outside of her bedroom door to keep her brother out because he was putting rats and spiders and scorpions in her bed. She had made the mistake of screaming bloody murder and telling her father what had happened, thinking it would help. She couldn't have been more wrong. Not only did her father not offer any help, but he also scolded her for yelling, and he cut the lock off her door. She rushed into the bedroom, whipped the bedspread off the bed, and found a copperhead snake. Though it wasn't her fault, her father was so furious with her, he sent her away to their summer house in the woods. She never complained. It was wonderful out there, away from her family. The only other people there were the servants. She ran wild and free in the woods and learned every nook and cranny of the landscape, and memorized every tree and learned about each of the animals. But her joy at the summer house was short-lived, and her brother came to visit the property to continue his hunting games with her. As she grew up, the game became more dangerous, and spending time alone in the woods became her salvation. When she told her parents about what her brother had been doing, they were of no help. Her father's only comment was to her brother, "Don't hurt her too badly. She's going to be married off in her 17th birthday." The sneer on her brother's face was pure evil. He told her that night that he would be taking a young woman deep in the woods so he and his friends could hunt her down. "Don't you ever worry that they'll talk?" she asked him, but her brother only laughed as he walked away, saying, "The dead can't talk." One day, a few months before her 17th birthday, she came downstairs to a room full of her brother and all of his hunting friends. He introduced her as that day's prey, and then he gave her a 20-minute head start. But instead of running in fear, she calmly turned away and walked back upstairs, not letting him see her scared. She knew that she had to disappear into the woods, even though it was late in the day, so she changed into brown and green clothing and left her shoes in the closet. And then she shimmied down the tree outside her window, and she ran off into the forest. She ran silently, stepping with great care to avoid leaving any footprints for them to follow, and she rubbed wildflowers all over her skin to get rid of any scent. And when she was deep in the forest, she climbed a large tree until she was 20 feet up, and she waited, and she caught her breath. Even though she knew she was still alone, she was drawn to look over into the tree next to her. There, looking back at her, were two big orange eyes. The being was huge and massive as the tree it sat in. At that time of day, the sun was setting and the shadows were growing quickly. She could not see the details of the creature except that it had a shaggy outline. She sat there staring at this being, and she heard her brother's hunting party in the distance looking for her. "Are you sure you saw her run into these woods?" her brother said. "Positive," one of the others said, laughing. "No one has a body like your sister." "Matt, can't you trail her yet?" her brother asked another friend. "Not yet," another from the party said, kneeling on the ground with a handful of leaves and rubbing them between his fingers to catch a scent. She looked back to where the monster was in the tree. It was looking down at the men as if trying to figure out what they were doing. When their eyes locked again, she could tell it realized that it wasn't the one being hunted. She was. Its eyes widened and then turned to red slits. And a commotion came from below, and she turned to watch the men arguing about what to do. When she looked back at the other tree, the creature was gone. She waited until she heard the hunting party move further away and then shimmied back down the tree, and she made her way back to the house. She climbed back into her bed, and just as she was about to close the window, she heard an ear-shattering roar, and it vibrated through the forest. A few minutes later, she saw movement outside. Her brother and his hunting team came running toward the house, yelling and tripping over themselves. And as they ran for their lives, she could see stones being thrown at their backs. She heard the roar again and nearly laughed at how ridiculous the hunting party looked. And when she heard them rush inside, she went down the stairs and found them all as scared and angry as they could be. One of the hunters, full of rage and adrenaline, exclaimed that he was going back out there to kill the thing, and he rushed back outside. After a few gunshots and more roars, the other two men were so terrified they jumped in their vehicles and they sped away. And then everything was silent again in the woods. In the end, my aunt left her family and didn't marry the man her father had planned for her. It turned out that he had been in the hunting party. Now that is the story from my great aunt Kat and her Bigfoot encounter. I know it was a dark story, but I felt that it answered some of the questions I hear repeated on your channel. Often I hear someone say, no one can be that silent, or no one could run full out and not leave prints. But I'm here to tell you that my Aunt Kat could. And if your life is in constant survival mode, you become what you have to be, to live and to survive. I think humans, like Bigfoot, can be extremely adaptable if and when the circumstances call for it, and we should never underestimate the human drive to survive. Thank you for reading my story. I love your channel. Keep doing what you do just the way you do it. And she signs off, B. What a cool story. I thought a Rugaroo was like a werewolf. Maybe it can be all sorts of things down in Louisiana. That's a Louisiana bayou monster, the Rugaroo or Loop-garoo. There's 2 or 3 different names for them. Maybe the Loop-garoo is the werewolf and the Rugaroo is the Bigfoot. I don't know. I don't know anything about this stuff. I just do these stories. But I think this was a great story, and I really appreciate Miss B sending this. What a great nostalgic story to share with this audience. Thank you, ma'am. I live in a ranch-style house. The garage is at one end of the house, and the bedrooms are at the other. My bedroom is the master bedroom, and it has a large picture window that looks out onto the backyard. Due to the slope of the yard and the door to the crawl space being directly under my bedroom window, the window is 9 feet off the ground. Now, I'm 5'6", and the window is still probably a good 4 feet over my head if I'm outside underneath it. There's this evergreen tree in my backyard 20 feet from the window. The needles are broad and flat, and the bark can be peeled off in stringy bits. The lower branches of this tree are 6 feet off the ground. In September of 1998, I was a sophomore in high school. It was a Sunday, and once church was over, my mom and I went to eat lunch and then went home. Within minutes of walking in the door, my friend called, and I took the handset of our cordless phone into my bedroom so we could have a conversation. While I was on the phone, I started pacing back and forth in my bedroom. I'd walk toward the window and turn and walk toward the opposite wall and then turn and do it all over again. At some point in the conversation, I walked toward the opposite wall and turned around to face the window. Right then, I noticed a dark shadow at the base of the window that resembled a human head and a neck. At first, I tried looking for a tree or something that could have cast a shadow of that shape, but I couldn't find anything. Then I realized that the shadow had a 3-dimensional quality to it, and I said, "Oh my God," out loud. The shadow dropped down out of sight, and I rushed over to the window in time to see this human-shaped shadow run across the yard toward the evergreen tree, and he climbed it. And when it reached the lower branches, it stopped and turned its head to see if I was looking at it. And then it kept climbing, and it disappeared. My friend asked me what was happening. I told him what I saw, and he said I needed to thank God because what I had described to him sounded like a demon that he had read about in a book on demonology. Well, not really knowing what this thing was, I thanked God anyway, and I figured it couldn't hurt. 2 days later, I was in my backyard and went over to that tree. The branches this thing had grabbed onto had died, and all the leaves on those branches had turned brown and fallen off to the ground in a loose pile. In 2005, I was working as a third shift security guard, and my favorite thing to help pass the time was to listen to the late night radio talk show about the paranormal. I finally summoned the courage and I called into the show and I shared my story. I told the host that I wasn't sure what the thing was, even though my friend said it was a demon, and the host asked me if it had glowing red eyes, and I said no. The host believed that since it didn't have glowing red eyes, that it wasn't a demon. I still don't know what it was, and I haven't seen anything quite like it since. Oh man, that is spooky. Young girl pacing back and forth in her room, looks out and sees this giant thing in her backyard. The creepiest thing about this is the limbs dying on the tree wherever it touched it. I guess demons are all about death, and everything they touch is contaminated like that, and the tree just couldn't take it. But what an interesting story. Only demons, it's only a demon if it has red eyes, apparently, to this person on, I bet it was Art Bell show about the paranormal. Apparently, if it doesn't have red eyes, it's not a demon, according to this guy. I don't know. I'm thinking maybe all demons don't have red glowing eyes, but who knows? What a great story. Thanks for sharing it with us, and we certainly do appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am. My sighting happened when I was 14 years old, and I remember it well. I haven't told many people about it because I know they will look at me like I'm nuts, but I want my story to be heard. I live in Oklahoma. My youth group went to a national forest for a camping trip for the weekend, a 3-hour drive from our town. Our clearing was surrounded by hundreds of miles of forests. To the left, 30 yards away, was a creek, and 40 yards to the right was a sad excuse for a toilet, which out in the middle of nowhere is a hole in the ground with a concrete building around it. There was plenty of game in the area. We saw deer, and we heard there were bison and bear and all the other little critters. We figured that out when we found bison poop in our campsite. No one was allowed to drink from the creek because it had E. coli in it, and it would make you sick. On the second night, I got up to use the bathroom. Everyone else was sacked out because some of them had gone rock climbing and other tiring activities. I was the only one up at the time. I had taken a flashlight so I could see where I was going and make sure I didn't step on a snake or something. When I lifted my light toward the creek, I saw a huge black figure. It was at least 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It had long black hair hanging from its arms and body, but I wasn't able to see any features. And it didn't seem aggressive in the least. I was only half awake, so I was thinking it was my shadow, and I waved and it waved back. In my sleepy mind, that confirmed that it was my shadow, and I did my business and I went back to bed. It didn't strike me until about a week later that it was not my shadow. My flashlight had been in front of me, not behind me. It would have taken a huge light from far back to cast a shadow of me that size. There was no possible way that was my shadow. The fact that it mimicked me by waving back shook me to my core, and it still does. I think back and I wonder if this thing had been coming into our camp all along and we didn't know about it. Thank you for all the videos and the awesome content. I hope you'll see this, and I think it's a good enough story to put in the video. Heck yeah, it's a good enough story. I think I've had this for a long time, maybe a year or two, but I'm getting through them all. Even with the breaks and the lags between me posting podcasts, I'm going to do every single one of them if it's legible. This was a great story. I thought this was very interesting. It's kind of a unique take on running into a Bigfoot in your campsite. It was very good. Thank you for sending the story. It was wonderful. Okay, this is kind of a creepy story that I thought was really good. It's a swamp story. I love swamp stories. I don't know why. Maybe because I've been in a few swamps and I just think they're beautiful. But anyway, never mind. Let me just read the story. In 2016, several hurricanes and tropical systems dumped copious amounts of rain in North and South Carolina. All duck holes, creeks, and rivers were flooded out of their banks. I have one particular spot that shines when high water floods the moist soil vegetation, allowing the ducks to access it. The spot is in a swamp flat off an artificially straight man-made canal that is plainly visible from satellite images. I've talked with locals and historians in the police department in the low country areas, and the consensus is that this complex of canals was dug by slaves in the 1700s or the 1800s in order to drain the swampland and allow access for farming, much like canals were dug for rice propagation closer to the coast. It is no secret that with their involuntary servitude, slaves brought a great deal of culture and beliefs with them from their original motherland. To this day, their descendants that remain will tell you stories of haints, boohags, platt-eyes, and the like. Right up the road, a farm owner once told me the story of Maggie, a local witch doctor in the post-Civil War area, who leveraged her reputation to protect a fishing hole via threats of putting a root or casting a spell on anyone that poached her fish and game. Are places like this still protected? Do ghosts move on, or do they still wander? I'm crossing some line by going along a remote canal that was surely miserable and grueling to hand dig in the slave days. Could it be that the forced labor that dug the canal that facilitated my duck hole dabbled in some sort of hoodoo or voodoo or witchcraft 100 years ago? The thought had certainly crossed my mind as I hunted this spot, but still, I nearly always hunt solo and I don't frighten too easily. To access this duck hole, I dropped my P-row in off the side of the road and I paddled about a mile down the overgrown and beaver dam canal before I broke off into a grass flat on either side. The water was so high that there was no dry ground or even wadable water for 500 yards on either side of the canal for the length of a mile. I was getting close to exiting the canal for the flooded vegetation when I saw two rectangular reflections several inches apart in my headlamp. They looked like they were on a big tree 5 or 6 feet up, but I didn't get a great look because they were shining back through the thick wax myrtle bush. They were so large that I thought they must have been reflective tacks or tape left by another hunter to mark their spot. I wasn't sure if I had paddled far enough to break off from the canal, so I nosed my P-row into the wax myrtle and I pulled out my phone to check my progress on the map. I saw that I still needed to go another couple hundred yards down the canal, so I backed out of the bush and made it 10 yards downstream. I don't recall what made me look over my shoulder, but I did, and I saw those two rectangular reflections still there. I thought it was odd, since I was 180 degrees on the opposite side of the tree from where I saw them the minute before, meaning that whatever it was had crawled around the tree and was watching me from the other side. Well, I paddled in reverse to turn my P-row around to face the tree, and when I did, the two rectangular reflections quickly dropped down a foot and disappeared as if they were eyes watching me before their host spooked and turned its head and fled. I heard 3 splashes in the swamp, and then I heard silence. I shined my light around, but I didn't see anything. And I thought the interaction was odd, but I chalked it up to being a displaced deer or a wild hog washed away out in the swamp, a quarter a mile from the shallow water. The large rectangular pupils were notable, but I figured that maybe that is what a deer's eyes look like when you're extremely close, shining them with a headlamp, and I had never paid close attention to even notice. I moved on and I hunted and I returned home with a modest brace of wood ducks. I lived with my brother at the time and I recounted the story to him. He immediately balked at the rectangular reflections. He said the only animal with rectangular pupils were octopuses. A quick internet search showed that the actual list also includes goats and toads. I'm confident that the eyes were too large to belong to a toad or an octopus, and I'm almost nearly as confident that there was not a goat standing 5 or 6 feet above the water that far back into the flooded swamp. Now, there's plenty of folklore that states that when the devil walks the earth, he takes the form of a man with cloven hooves and horns like a goat, and often with wings as well. Now, I'm not saying I came face to face with Lucifer deep in the South Carolina swamp, but given the area's history and what I saw, I am not ruling it out. Oh, that is so cool. I've never heard of rectangular eyes or irises. Is it iris or pupils? Pupils. I've never heard of that. I would have never even known an octopus had square pupils, or a goat, or what was the other animal? Can't remember. Ducks? I'd have to read back. Anyway, I would not put square red eyes looking back at me. I would not put that together with the devil, but this guy did, because he did know about the hexes and voodoos and hoodoos and plat eyes and all that stuff with the slave culture that was there long before he got there. And you do have to wonder if some of those pagan religions didn't cast some kind of demonic spell on a place. I wonder about that. That's really got me thinking. That's interesting. Anyway, I'm just rambling. Didn't mean to carry on and say nothing, which I do often, but I just thought it was an interesting story. Anyway, I'll shut up. That was a great story. Thank you for sending it. Thanks for joining me on this podcast, and we'll see you on the next one, which will be pretty soon. Thanks again.